because I was just on Google Meet for my meeting right before I got on with you, if that has something to do with the disruption here.
Boss,
But
it's
either way,
actually
go.
pretty okay now. It looks pretty okay. It
Okay.
it fixed itself. So we're good. I
Okay.
love that. And by the way, when I was teaching the members about energy shifts and emotional variation, I used the same example you just shared about the $150 speech. But now seeing you do it, I realize how much better you did it than I did.
Well, look, yeah,
So,
it's lift them up to let them down. Lift them up to let them down. Everything's going your way, and then boom, the bottom drops out.
yeah.
And that's where the energy shift comes in. But
Mm,
here's something else, Yasser. This is what I realized about speaking. And I've been speaking 25 years, but I only realized this about 10 years ago. If you're always dynamic, you're no longer dynamic. Let me say that again. If you're always dynamic, you're no longer dynamic.
mm.
I used to think if you're always but even that gets tiresome. So when I realized this, I started taking off all the spice sometimes. I'll give you an example. In the mid 90s, I was an events planner. And one of my jobs was to set up the stage for the speaker. Now, keep in mind, the whole time I wanted to be the speaker, right? So I would go into these ballrooms, I'd tape down the power cords, I would move chairs around, I would move the lectern up front, I'd move more chairs. They used to call me the chairman because I used to move so many chairs,
Mm-hmm.
right? But it never failed. Every single solitary time I stepped into one of those empty ballrooms, I would walk up front and I would stand behind the lectern and I would hope and wish that one day people would show up to see me. And it was what I said to myself when I stood behind those lecterns that I think made the real difference for me. I said, today I move the chairs, tomorrow I move the audience, right? And that became my mantra. So when I say that on stage, you see how I kind of just took all the spice off of it? I wasn't up and down. I wasn't lifting them up. I wasn't. Sometimes you have to do that because it gives the audience a chance to breathe before you go back into your next wild and crazy story.
I also feel that when you take that spice off, it sounds more real and authentic too.
It
Because one of the
does.
things that I've seen, especially with Toastmasters nowadays, where it's become so theatrical with the performances that it looks like a performance, and then you lose trust with the audience. But when you feel like someone's having a conversation with you, I trust them a lot more. So that's a really, really good point.
It has to be, whenever you're talking to your audience, it needs to feel conversational.
Mm,
When you're in your story, you can be as wild and as crazy as whatever happened in the story. But when you're having a conversation with your audience, and you're exactly right, that's what's happening. People are being so theatrical and it's like almost formulaic. And yes, you will turn your audience off from word one.
mm.
So one thing I learned from Ron Arden, who was a legendary speech coach, is when you're kind of going from your story to your point, what you should be saying in your own mind is, but seriously, this is what I came to tell you. But seriously, this is what I came to tell. And that's going to automatically put you in a conversational mode when you're talking to your audience.
I love that. I'm going to have a question about that later because yesterday one of the members asked when they turn the camera on or when they're doing the speech that they turn into the speech mode and less conversational. So we'll
Yeah.
get that towards the end. Let me just start off with some of the questions I'm seeing in the chat. So the first one that I'm seeing is from Julius, and Julius asks, "What did you do for practice while still coming up as a public speaker?"
That's a loaded question. So you got to keep in mind, I was a kid that was 10 years old. I had a lisp, speech impediment. I had a lisp that was so bad that people used to refer to me as Daffy Duck, right? So when I was starting to get into speaking, I said, well, let me look in the past to see what people have done. So one of the persons I looked at was Demosthenes, one of the great Greek orators. And they said what he would do was run on the beach while reciting his speech. So I didn't have a beach, but I had a hill. So I start running up the hills while reciting my speeches. So then that helped me learn how to breathe. Okay. Next thing they said he did was he put marbles in his mouth to make sure he could work on his diction. I don't have marbles, but I got bubble gum. So I put a whole bunch of bubble gum in my mouth and started working on my diction. But the way to rehearse is, here's my advice. Rehearse as if you are actually in front of your audience. Do all the things you would do as if your audience is actually right there. Doing this, reading from a piece of paper, is not rehearsal. You got to get up because a lot of the rehearsal memory comes from the muscle memory in your movement. And so you want to, the second thing is don't always rehearse from the beginning. If you were always rehearsing from the beginning and you get interrupted by life, you go back to rehearsing from the beginning. Now the beginning is real strong, and then you have a slope speech, and everything else is kind of weak. So I'm constantly rehearsing. In the 25 years I've been speaking, I've never written anything down. So it's always rehearsal, 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 but rehearse as if you're actually there in front of your audience. And if you do that over and over and over again, then by the time you get there, you'll feel like you've already been there.
Just a quick point on that. When you're putting a new keynote together, before you step on stage, what do you think is the average amount of times you've rehearsed it?
If it's a brand new keynote,
Mm-hmm.
oh gosh, if it's a brand new keynote, it's more of a question of when am I not rehearsing, right? Because even though I said rehearse as if you're actually there, you can also rehearse while you're driving. You can rehearse while you're doing other things in your in-between time. But I can tell you now, for me, who've been here for this 25 years, I give it 3 good run-throughs before I get back on stage. But here's the key. Yasser, I don't rehearse so that I can remember what I rehearsed. I rehearse so that I can abandon what I've rehearsed if I need to. Because when you get up in front of an audience, things are going to happen. Spontaneous moments are going to happen. And those are the magical moments in the speech if you take advantage of them, right? Like one time I was in Sri Lanka. It was a 4-hour workshop that I was giving on a Friday night, and it was in Colombo. And it was going pretty well, but then I brought somebody up on stage and he was telling this story. And the whole time he was telling a story, I thought he was talking about a guy friend of his. And eventually I realized he was talking about a girl. And I was able to get all this humor and fun out of it. And it changed the direction and trajectory of that program to the point where somebody contacted me about a week later and said, when I watched the movie The Titanic, that was the greatest experience of my life until last Friday night. Right? So sometimes those spontaneous moments are so magical. But here's the problem, Yasser. Most people aren't willing to leave their script to go take advantage of them. If you rehearse well enough that you can leave your script, take advantage of those moments, and come right back, that's when you're going to really connect with your audience.
So in a way, you're rehearsing to be able to traverse when things go south or things go sideways.
I like that as a phrase, rehearse to traverse. I like
Oh,
that.
yeah,
I like
good.
You just came up with a
I'm
foundation.
copywriting that one, Craig. That one goes in my book.
Don't be remembered, be repeated. People will repeat that from you. I love that.
I love it. I love that. That's a fantastic example. The next question we have is from Karima, and Karima says, can your voice change when you age, and what can you do to improve it? And by the way, we get a lot of questions around how do I sound more confident, a deeper voice, so maybe you can expand on that too.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember her name right now. I can give you a link to her afterwards, but she's a voice coach. And I brought her on to my inner circle and had her speak to my group. And I'll get you her information afterwards. But yes, I do think your voice will change as you get older. You can see it happen with different singers and so forth. The one thing I think is important is don't try to speak with a voice that's not yours. Right? Don't try to speak with a voice that's not yours. When you learn how to breathe, it's automatically going to help you with the strength of your voice. And that's what that speech coach does. The voice coach, he teaches you how to breathe. But the other thing is just keep making sure your diction is good. So what I would do is I would do something like this. This is not to self promote myself, but I'm in the book Guerrilla Marketing on the Front Lines. I would take any book and I would just read. And Yasser, this is going to seem ridiculous, but it works. I would read anything as clearly as I possibly could, like this. Problem solved, right? Wrong. Old habits die hard. 2 months after we implemented our process. So I'm going through it as clearly as I could. And I do this before I go to bed. So my subconscious mind works on it overnight. And the next morning I wake up, I speak clearer than I did the night before. So these are the different types of practices you can do. Here's something else you can do. When you have a book like this, you want to contrast your pace, your volume, your pitch, your rate, all these different things. So do it in a ridiculous format. Anything you need to work on in speaking, you want to do it to the point where it almost feels like ridiculous. Because when you get on the actual stage, you'll stretch yourself. So I might do something like this. A tagline can also position a business. A recent business owner approached me for a consultation about creating A tagline. So I'm just contrasting everything. I did that for years. And all of a sudden I was no longer monotone.
Mm.
I had a really dynamic aspect to it. Of course, we know we need to turn the dynamic off sometime, but that's what I did to become way more dynamic as a speaker.
I'm really glad you mentioned the exaggeration bit, because one of the questions that I always had was, okay, I'm doing this exaggeration in practice, but it seems so silly. When am I ever going to speak like this in person? So the goal is not to speak like that, right?
It's not, it's to stretch yourself, because anything you need to work on in speaking, you need to overemphasize it in rehearsal.
Mm.
Let's say, Yasser, and I've done this quite a bit. Let's say I'm going to speak to China or Japan or somewhere where English is not the first language. In rehearsal, I slow down. I slow down because I know that when I get to China or Japan, they're going to have to translate it for themselves before I go to the next part of my speech. So even that is something that I work on in rehearsal. And I overemphasize it to the point of feeling like almost silly or ridiculous. But when I
Mm.
get up on stage, it's going to meet that happy medium. And then they're going to say, Craig still talk too fast.
I'm glad I'm not the only one. That's a really good example. Rabiel has the next question. Rabiel says, how do you deal with your nerves in the last few seconds before presenting? And that's also the question I had, which was around your pre-speech routine. So maybe you can talk about both.
Yeah. Let's talk about nerves in general for a second. One of the things I realized about nerves was, well, let me tell you, my best friend asked me to sing at his wedding. Okay. Now, Yasser, you're a smart guy. What do you think the first problem was?
You know him too well.
Well, the first problem was I can't sing,
Oh.
right? But when we were kids, just like somebody mentioned, your voice changes. When we were kids, I could sing, but my voice changed and I couldn't really sing. But the second problem was I wasn't assertive enough to say no.
Mm.
So now I'm stuck, right? Keep in mind, this is supposed to be his only wedding. So, we get to the church and the groomsmen were coming up to me like, hey, Craig, are you nervous? Are you nervous? I was like, me? Come on, man. I played college basketball in front of 18,000 people. I'm the kid. I don't get nervous. And then the music started playing. And Yasser, for the first time in my life, my breath left me. I don't know where my breath went or when it was coming back, when my breath was gone. Now, let me ask you a question. If you can't breathe, can you sing?
No.
No. And I wish I could tell you that I brought it back together and I became, no, I was the worst wedding singer in the history of weddings. But I got a lesson from that. Never try to fake out your nerves. Never try to fake out. I was trying to fake out my nerves and act like they weren't bothering me. So from that moment on, I decided to do something. Accept your nerves. Accept your nerves. They're actually there to help you. And then I started learning how to flip the script on my nerves. When people ask me before a presentation, hey, man, are you nervous? I said, I hope so. Shoot, these nerves are here to help. It's just energy. And so in 1999, at the World Championship of Public Speaking, in front of 2,000 people in Chicago, Illinois, with a chance to make or break my entire career and two big jumbotrons on each side of the stage, you think I was nervous? Heck yeah. But I said to myself, thank you for being here in terms of my nerves. And I went out there and gave the speech better that day than I ever had in rehearsal, because in rehearsal, I wasn't nervous. So what I would suggest to you is accept your nerves. Don't try to fight your nerves. Focus completely on your audience rather than on your nerves. I don't know if you've ever heard this statement, what you focus on expands. If you focus on trying to get rid of your nerves will drown you. So focus on your audience. One other thing is this. Understand the 10-to-1 ratio. What happens to a lot of people, Yasser, when they get nervous? What happens to their body and their voice and things like that?
Start shaking, throat dries up.
Yeah, throat dries up, they're shaking, they might have sweaty hands. What's happening to us is 10 times more than what our audience can pick up. So that should help put people at ease. It's 10 times more than what our audience can pick up. The problem is a lot of people get up on stage and say, oh, bear with me, I'm nervous. Now, guess what? Now the audience is nervous too. So if you can realize that 10-to-1 ratio, then chances are you can fight through it. But accept your nerves, understand the 10-to-1 ratio, flip your script on your nerves, and then prepare in a way that there's no saying. Don't prepare so that you can get it right. Prepare so that you can't get it wrong.
Mm.
And that's the type of preparation we need to do. Right before I take the stage, as I'm being introduced, I say to myself, may I forget myself, remember my speech, and touch my audience. And right before I take the stage, I say, let's make this an experience. Boom, now I'm ready to go. But the focus is where the focus should be, which is on my audience.
Mm.
So those are some of the ways that I handle nerves. And I like to be nervous now.
Mm. I'm wondering, Craig, when you have a presentation that you can't really prepare for, so let's say in corporate, hey, tomorrow can you present this? How then do you deal with it because you're not prepared in the moment?
Well, let's say you might share this story with your group, but I'm not sure. But 2 days after I won the world championship, if you had been walking towards me in the Chicago airport, you would have seen my wife on one side of me and me carrying right here this gigantic crystal trophy, just walking through the Chicago airport. And everybody's looking at me like, well, wow, who is that? You probably get that nowadays, Yasser, because of your fame. I don't know if you've ever got this one, though. There was one lady looking at me like, is that Denzel Washington? But this is when I realized my life would never be the same. This petite lady in a pink dress runs up to me in the middle of the airport. Everybody's watching. And she starts reading the bottom of my trophy. And she says, 1999 world champion of public speaking. Wow. Say some things. In the middle of the airport. And I'm speechless. But that's when I realized no matter where I go in life, people are going to say, would you mind saying some things? And that's when I came to the understanding that I can no longer get ready to speak. I have to stay ready to speak. So my motto is don't get ready, stay ready. So when you're in one of those type of environments where they say, hey, we need you to speak this afternoon or we need you to speak tonight, what I suggest is have your collection of stories. Start right now with a story file and start collecting different stories from you, your life, from other things that you've heard of. And that way you're always going to be ready to speak. And it's the same thing when you go on a podcast or you go on television or you go on a radio. If you have your collection of stories, then no matter what they ask you, you'll be able to state it and illustrate it. And the things that get repeated by other people are your stories and your phrases. So I suggest strongly to have a story file and a foundational phrase file. And then the one other thing I'll do delivery-wise, if you don't have much time to prepare, don't rush. Don't rush. A lot of people just try to get it over with. Write this down. You can't rush and resonate. You can't rush and resonate. When they see you taking your time, they're going to feel like you have complete command. And that's what I love about watching some of your videos, Yasser. You're not rushing. You're taking your time. The audience feels and knows that you're in complete command. And that's because of how you don't rush.
Almost like I've learned from the best, right?
The times that I've failed as a speaker were the times where I've rushed.
Mm.
Now that brings about another point. If you have too much content, that's one of the biggest mistakes that speakers make. There's an old speaker proverb: when you squeeze your information in, you squeeze your audience out. So it's a lot of times less is more when it comes to your presentation. Too many people try to put too much information in too little time, and that will ruin their presentation. Ask me how I know that.
It's a very relevant example. Right before our call, I had a one-on-one with someone giving a 6-minute speech, and they were just rushing through it. And I asked them, like, why are you going so fast? He said, oh, if I go slower, this will take 14 minutes. Like, we were supposed to remove a lot of that information so you had time to breathe. That doesn't mean you just throw the information at the audience. So
exactly.
Also goes to preparation.
That's where it's called, you got to be able to do what you call kill your favorites. Even if it's something you really, really like. You know, even in like for the Toastmasters contest, for example, average speakers will try to squeeze 9 minutes into 7. The ones who usually win and do well are ones who take 5 minutes, stretch it into 6. You don't want to squeeze too much information in or you'll squeeze your audience out.
I love that. You have so many of these phrases that you say that I immediately remember. If you have a list of all of them somewhere, let me know. I would love to reuse them everywhere. They're so tacky. I love it.
I do have a couple of blog posts at craigvalentine.com. I have like 40 phrases for speakers and things like that that people can remember and repeat. But keep that in mind, Yasser. That's the effect. If you can tell a story and make a point and have a phrase that people can remember and repeat, then you're going to have a long-term impact on your audience.
I love that.
People still come up to me today and say, don't get ready, stay ready. So we want to have these foundational phrases that are fewer than 10 words, you focused, meaning focused on your audience, and rhythmic. Doesn't mean it has to rhyme. It means it needs to be easy to say. Your dream is not for sale doesn't rhyme, but it's easy to roll off the lips of people.
I love that so much. Okay, let's get to the next one. JC says, you seem like you have always been a good communicator. Is this something that you were born with, or did you work on it?
I'm the least likely person to be a world champion. I'm the least likely person to be a communicator of any kind. I stopped talking for 5 years when I was a kid because the man in the mall called me Daffy Duck. And I didn't want people making fun of me. So no, I was not a good communicator at all. And then when about 5 years later, when I kind of forced myself to face reality and started working through some things, then I was able to get onto the path of becoming a speaker and eventually won the world championship. And I actually saw that guy 2 months after I won the world championship. I saw that same father who called me Daffy Duck. And when I went to him, he said, I saw your articles. I read about you in the newspaper. That's wonderful what you've been able to accomplish. He said, but I read that one article. I can't believe that at the tender age of 10, some man would have the nerve to call you Daffy Duck. He didn't even remember it was him. But in that moment, I found some humor and I said, man, that's despicable. And we just had a laugh and had some fun with it. But no, the short answer is I was a terrible communicator, worked my tail off to become better, which should give anybody hope. Right? Should give anybody hope. And so now what I do is I let my long road lead to their shortcut. All the tools, the processes, the formulas I picked up, I'm letting my long road lead to their shortcut. And that's what I've been doing for years.
Or like you like to say, and I've been running my mouth ever since. one of the speeches. Shafi has the next question. Shafi says, what strategies do you use to effectively connect with diverse audiences and keep them engaged?
Listen, any audience that you're speaking to, maybe with the exception of engineers, are going to love your stories. They're going to love your stories, but they're also going to want to be involved. So for example, in pretty much every story and every module I have, I'm asking people, raise your hand if you've ever done this. Or I'm asking people, turn to your neighbor and for 30 seconds, discuss the greatest praise or compliment you've ever received. I'm finding ways to get them involved because here's the key. We can't just give a speech. We have to create an experience. So we got to find ways for people to reflect. We got to find ways to get them involved. We have to make sure we uncover humor rather than add humor. Give you a quick example. A lot of people, this throws people off, Yasser, but some people in Toastmasters don't like me. I'm going to tell you why. Think about my title, the 1999 World Champion of Public Speaking. I joined Toastmasters in March of 1998. I got my CTM in March of 1999, and I won, and in August of 1999, I won the World Championship in my very first try. And whenever I'm in front of Toastmasters, they clap, but I can feel the haters in the room. Because people come up to me all the time. They say, Craig, you don't even know what it feels like to lose a contest. I say, yes, I do. I lost the humorous speech contest at the club level. That's the lowest level. And I'll never forget a seasoned Toastmaster named Alan Mish came up to me afterwards and he said, Craig, you can win the World Championship of Public Speaking. I said, man, what are you talking about? I just lost the humorous speech contest at the club level. He said, that's okay. He said, the only thing wrong with your humorous speech was that it wasn't funny. And now I ask my audience, raise your hand if you've ever given a speech you wish you could take back. Boom, now their hands go up. But the reason I told that story is because where are you going to uncover the humor? When you add humor, it feels forced. When you uncover humor, it's already there. So where you're going to uncover humor is within your stories, within your characters dialogue. What characters say to each other. Just like the limo driver, when he said, man, I still got to take you back. Well, that's where you're going to uncover so much of your humor. And guess what? If they don't laugh, the story's still true. But if you try to bring in a joke and they don't laugh, you're done. So never add humor to a speech, always uncover humor within it. And you can do that within dialogue and the spaces and faces you make in between the lines. That's where you're going to find a lot of your humor. And it doesn't matter who you're speaking to. Understand this. I've spoken to maximum security prisons. They love the stories. I've spoken to CEOs. They love the stories. On not this Saturday, but next Saturday, I'll go to Austin, Texas. I'll speak to the ultra wealthy. Everybody in my audience is worth over $100 million. They love the stories. Become a master storyteller, and you will be able to connect with any audience you have.
There's so many things I picked up from that. I don't even know what to ask you next. So I'm trying to stay in the moment here.
Think about this, Yasser. I gave a story about forgiveness. I call it the snake bite. When I went to a maximum security prison, and it was a Toastmaster club in the prison. So the person who brought me in sent me an email the next week, and he said, "You might have remembered the guy Buzz who walked with a limp and had like a crutch that he walked with." He said the week or a couple days after you came, he came up and gave a speech. And his speech was all about how when he was younger, he was shot by the police in the back. And he said in his speech, the whole time he was in prison, all he wanted to do, his whole goal was to kill that police officer's family in front of him and then kill that police officer. He said the two most important days in my life were the day I got shot and the day I heard Craig Valentine speak. Because on that day, I learned that I needed to forgive for myself, and what a peace it brought on to me. That was the day, Yasser, I realized the power of what we do, because that literally could have saved a life. And I know that's a deep story, and I know it's hard to hear, but that's what I always go back to when I think about, should I still be doing this? So we can save lives, we can help lives, we can enhance lives, but it's the story that does the work.
Yeah, imagine if you just showed up and just told them the point. Like, it just wouldn't stick. You need
Wouldn't stick.
Yeah.
Right? If I came up there and I said, you know what? Nobody's ever died from a snake bite. It's the venom circulating throughout your body afterwards, but I gave them nothing to illustrate that. Write this down. What's loose is lost. What's loose is lost. Anytime you make a point that you don't tie to a story or an activity or an analogy, they will not remember it. It's gone. So we need to anchor it with a story, an activity, an analogy, maybe a photo, and that way we're keeping it tight. But whatever's loose is lost.
Tell a story, make a point.
Yes.
Okay. What is the combination? Jane asked this question. What is the combination of good emotional variety in a public speaker?
Explain that. Good emotional variety.
Yeah, Jane, can I unmute you so you can elaborate?
Yeah. So if I would start from zero, what are the elements that I need to bring in to be very good in emotional variety?
All right. Well, I'll come from it from this angle. First of all, you have a great voice, so you should be speaking. Second of all, I'm looking at a couple of things we need to do. Tell a story, make a point, foundational phrase, fewer than 10 words. You do that, make sure you don't retell your story, but you relive it. Don't retell your story, relive it. And the way you relive it is, I'll give you an example. Instead of saying something like, and then I went to the principal's office and the principal threw me out of the school. No, we need to exchange narration for dialogue. I went to the principal's office. He looked me directly in the eyes and he said, Mr. Valentine, you are expelled. Boom. The dialogue is what's going to bring people back into it emotionally. Because here's the thing, Yasser, you can't react to narration. You can only react to dialogue. Watch how ridiculous this looks. And I went to the principal's office and he threw me out of the school. That looks ridiculous, right? But if I say, and I went to the principal's office and he said, Mr. Valentine, you are expelled. I can react to that and it makes sense. So that's where you're going to bring the emotion in. But let me say something else. This is a very important delivery tool that speakers need to have. Yasser, this is critical. I need actually a volunteer. Can I have a volunteer?
Sure. Jane, why don't you volunteer? Or actually, Ali raised his hand.
Ali raised his hand first. I want to go with Ali. Ali, how you doing?
I'm good. Great.
Good.
Enjoying every minute of it.
Yeah, and I appreciate the energy that you've been giving me. I'm looking at you. I'm watching my watchers. But where did he go? On another screen? Okay, can't see Ali anymore. Anyway,
I'm
Ali,
here.
if you were in front of, let's say you were in front of 800 people, and you wanted to find out how many of them have ever been to the United States, what would you say? And you're in person. You're not on Zoom. You're in person. What would you say?
I would say raise your hand if you've ever been to the US.
You might have taken my course before because he actually got it right. But Yasser, what most people do is they say something like this. How many of you have ever been to the US? Right? Or who here has been to the US? And they're doing what I'm calling speaking to all, right? I always ask my audience this. I say, how would you like a tool you can use to make a deeper connection with your audience than you've ever felt before? If so, say yes. They always say yes. I say, okay, this is a slight edge principle, which means it's a slight change in the way you do things. But if you do it, trust me, they will leave your speech feeling a certain way. Feeling your speech, not just hearing it, but feeling your speech. So Yasser, when people say, how many of you have ever been to Baltimore? How many people are they speaking to? Everybody. How many people should they speak to? One. So you got to ask yourself, how can you rephrase the question to make it sound and feel grammatically like you're speaking to one rather than 800? And that is, have you ever been to Baltimore? Raise your hand. Ali got it right. Raise your hand if you've ever been to Baltimore. Singular grammatically. Write this down. It will change your public speaking life. Speak to one, but look to all. Speak to one, but look to all. There are far too many speakers speaking to far too many people far too often. And you'll hear them. They'll say things like, ladies and gentlemen, and friends, and folks, and boys and girls, and societal members, and members of the, you might as well be saying friends, Romans, countrymen. Stop. Speak to one. Yasser, you ever heard a speaker say something like, now some of you might be thinking. Guess what? There is no some of you. Now you might be thinking that's the way to get that across. Or you heard people say, now many of you probably came up to the conclusion, there is no many of you. Now, in case you've come to the conclusion. So here's what I'll give you as a tool. It's called the hallway test. The hallway test. And here's how it works. Let's say Yasser and I are walking by each other in the hallway. If I can say it to him as an individual, I can take it up on stage. So we're going to have to be creative here, Yasser, and act like we're walking by each other in the hallway.
Sure.
If we're walking by each other in the hallway, would I say to you, how many of you have ever been to Baltimore?
No.
But what I would say to you is, have you ever been to Baltimore? And then we can connect on that. So it's what I call speak to one, but look to all. And I'm telling you, if you can put that into your presentation everywhere, your audience members are going to leave feeling like you're speaking directly to them. I gave a commencement speech to University of Phoenix, and to make things more confusing, it was in Ohio, and it was like 4,000 people there. And I got a DM on Facebook from a person who said, I wasn't one of the graduates. I know there were thousands of people there, but I have to tell you, Mr. Valentine, it felt like you were speaking to me. That has nothing to do with me and everything to do with speak to one, but look to all. And the last thing I'll say about that is, remember the look to all part. Because I'll give this lesson sometimes, and Yasser, people in my audience will go up to one person in the audience and say, you ever been to Baltimore? And they're just looking at one person, then they'll look at another person, you ever been to Baltimore? I'm like, look to all. So it's raise your hand if you've ever been to Baltimore. So you'll be surprised at how often we need to fix that.
Mm.
Catch yourself, make it a habit, and you'll have a deeper connection than you ever had before.
And there's so many nuances in what you're saying, and all of this can only come from experience. You can't just read all this in a book and expect to implement it. The fact that you've been in the field for as long as you have is how you pick this up.
Yeah. In 1999, after I won the world championship, I got a call from a guy who said, Craig, my name is Wade Randolph, and I'd like you to coach me on my speaking. And I was like, Wade, I'm just a speaker. I'm not a speech coach. I wouldn't even know where to start. He said, I'll pay you. I said, that's a good place to start. And I started coaching. I started coaching Wade, and I'm going to tell you, I had no idea what I was doing, but he kept coming back. And for some reason, he kept coming back. And as he came back, I started figuring out processes and formulas and recipes that helped Wade. And then Wade spread the word. And all of a sudden I was getting more people and I had more processes and formulas. And so now 25 years later, I've got all these processes and formulas that people can use and remember. And that, you're right, it came from experience. Speak your way into speaking.
Brilliant. Craig, I want to make sure, are we tight on time? Are we ending exactly on the hour?
Ending, yeah, if we can end down the hour, that would be
Okay.
perfect. Somebody's knocking at my door. I'm not going to answer it. But no, if we can end, did you need more time?
No, I'm just seeing the list of questions. I wanted to make sure that we can get as many as possible. So I'll just pick the ones that we haven't already answered.
Okay.
So I see one from Yuva who says, will anxiety from work or personal life affect public speaking? And if so, how do you handle that? If it's similar to the last one, let me know.
No, that's a great question because you need to be completely present when you're on stage. I really truly believe, and this is not just a play on words, but being present adds to your presence. You're completely there. So my one word answer to this is meditation. Meditation. What you do off stage will help you on stage. I meditate. So no matter what happens, if somebody's knocking on the door, if the internet's not working correctly or whatever, I'm still going to be right here and present with my audience because that's what meditation helps do for me. Okay. So, and here's the other thing. Let's say you gave a great speech and you go somewhere else. You can't take that old audience with you. You got to leave that speech behind and go be present with this new audience because this new audience cares nothing about the old audience. Sometimes I've given a great speech and I fly somewhere and I'm like, I'm trying to recreate it. No, it's a completely new experience. So meditate. What you do off stage is going to help you on stage.
I love how you close your answers with a point again. You make the point at the start and then make the point again at the end. I love that.
Kind of like a sandwich, right? Yeah.
Yeah. We have a question that's similar from both Lorena and Shirley, and they ask something along the lines of, how do you balance presenting and a rehearsed speech, but also sounding authentic and showing emotions along the way?
Yeah. It's something I call the bounce formula. And the bounce formula to me, if you're familiar with the bounce dryer sheets that you put in the dryer and you just put one in the dryer and it makes everything fresh. If I change one thing in my speech, it makes everything fresh for me. So next time I go give a keynote, I might change one word. I might change one look. I'm going to change something and it'll make the whole experience fresh for me again. So, you know, I think some people worry about that. I'm going to tell you, rehearsal is boring. It's boring. But when you get up in front of the audience and you realize that you don't have to think about what you're going to say next, and you can be completely present with the audience and you can jump on the spontaneous moments, even though the rehearsal is boring, it's very, very worth it. Every time you get in front of a new audience, it's going to feel fresh for you and it's going to feel fresh for them. Now, the other thing is this. I also am a huge believer in using callbacks. Callbacks. So I'll give you an example. You write this down. It's what I call the PEST formula, P-E-S-T. A callback is when you refer back to something that happened before. That completely customizes it for your audience. So you can call back to something that happened as you prepared for the event. You can call back to something that happened at the event itself that everybody's pretty much aware of. You can call back to something that one of the other speakers said. And you can call back to something that happened as you traveled to the event. So here's a quick example. When I went to Bali, Indonesia, as I traveled to the event, I'm in the airport and I'm still wondering how I'm going to open my presentation, right? So I go through the airport. This is in 2010 or 11, I think, at 2000, around that time frame, maybe 2012. And I go through customs and I bring out my passport and the guy at customs looks at me and he looks at my passport, looks back at me and he says, "Are you sure you're not Obama?" Ali, come on. You know I got to bring that into my speech now. You know I got to open with that. So if you go online and you look on YouTube, I think it's something about Craig Valentine and openings or something like that, you'll see that exact moment. And Yasser, the room exploded. Exploded. But you know what else they're thinking? That only happened here. So it's automatically going to be fresh rather than being, the opposite of fresh is canned. We don't want to give a canned speech. We want to give a fresh one. And so if you can use some of those callbacks of things that had happened during the event, it's going to be funny. I went to Philadelphia one time to go speak. And as soon as I was coming in, the lady who was checking me in, she said, "Oh, wow, you're Craig Valentine. You know what? Your picture does you justice." That's a rude thing to say. Now I got to live up to my picture. But I had something to bring on stage with me and made the audience laugh. And then we were off to the races. So think about using little callbacks like that. But again, it goes back to what we were talking about before. If you haven't rehearsed your speech enough, you won't be willing to leave your script in order to do that. Rehearse, rehearse, rehearse.
Beautiful. I'm going to combine Kalyani's question with Jatin's question. So I'll ask, which learning has had the biggest impact in 10xing your speaking skills?
It's got to be the storytelling. Learning how to master your stories and how to understand how conflict is the hook to your story. Dialogue is the heart that breathes life into your story. Learning how to relive it rather than retell it has 10x'd everything for me. Yeah, and then also learning how to structure your entire keynote.
That was actually the next question.
Yeah,
I'm reading. Like, how do you? Well, maybe you can answer this. You have an entire course on how to structure a keynote, so I don't expect you to summarize that in 2 minutes. But Simrad asks, when we're not prepared for a speech or an interview, how do you talk in that situation, or how do you structure your answers then?
When you're not prepared for it?
Yes. Let's say someone asks you to give a toast last minute.
Oh, yeah. So again, I'm going to go back to my stories. If you're collecting your stories over time, you're going to always have a story that's appropriate for that moment. That's just the way it is. You know, it's the same thing. I have no idea what I'm going to be asked on certain interviews, but I know I'm going to have a story in response to it. Right. But let's go back to the keynote question for a second. How do most people open their keynotes? When you see most speakers speak, not even just speakers, but most speakers, they open with, "Hi, glad to be here. I want to thank so-and-so for bringing me in." Let me tell you, you have 7 seconds before your audience realizes whether or not they like you. You have 30 seconds before they realize whether or not they want to hear more. We cannot waste that time with what I call unpleasant pleasantries. Right? It's okay to thank people, but it can't be the first thing that we say. I want you to look at it like a sitcom, a situation comedy. What do they do nowadays? They get you into the scene, they get you laughing, and then they go to the opening credits. We need to do the same thing. So for example, here's how I might begin my speech. They clap. They expect me to come out and be rowdy, or they expect me to come out and say thank you. And this is what I do. I was afraid to come here. Not because of you, but because years ago I was traveling so much that my daughter, who was 6 years old at the time, actually decided to write me a note. And I keep it with me. Now imagine if you received this. It says, "Dear Daddy, I miss you. You are the best daddy in my whole family." Now, I got to be honest, up until I got that note, I thought I was the only daddy in the whole family. Maybe I should stay off the road and make sure no more daddies are coming through So now I got 3 laughs and I'm off to the races. And then after that, I can thank the people who brought me in. Right? So one of the most important parts of the keynote is to come out with a bang. We need to come out with a bang. Then we need to immediately go into a big promise. By the end of today, you're going to pick up the tools you can use to become the type of leader that others respect, admire, and want to follow. That big promise, Yasser, becomes the litmus test. Everything else in my speech needs to prove that promise. If it doesn't, I need to toss it out. And then I need to give them a roadmap. This comes to you in the form of what I call my 4 R's to remarkable results. That one sentence lets my audience know we're going to go from 1 R to the next R to the next R to the next. So now the bang gets their attention. The big promise gets them excited to be there. And the roadmap shows them where we're going. Boom, we're off to the races. We're off to the races.
And I've used this exact same structure to make my own keynotes after I went through your course, and it works beautifully well. What I love about it the most is how fast you can put it together. It's very quick.
Yeah. And then when you start putting together your modules, like your 7 to 10 minute modules, one of my R's to remarkable results is got to face reality. So I got a story in there. I've got some quotes. I got some phrases. I've got some activities, 7 to 10 minute modules. And now that becomes easy to do. If you have think about this for a second. If you have a collection of, let's say, 7 or 8 modules, somebody that can call you to speak. Like, let's take a couple weeks ago, they wanted me to speak at FINRA, Financial Industry Regulatory Authority. They said, we want you to come in here and speak for 30 minutes. Boom, boom, boom. I'm grabbing these 3 modules. I'm off to the races. That was Tuesday. On Thursday, I was speaking at another FINRA event. They wanted me for 45 minutes. Boom, 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 boom. I grabbed these 4 modules. I'm off. So if you can become a master of your modules, then if they call you to speak today, you'll be ready to speak by tonight. Don't get ready, stay ready.
I love that. Well, Craig, we're on the top of the hour. Folks, did we enjoy this? Show a quick thumbs up if we enjoy this. Okay, JC's like, yes, this is what I signed up for.
Sawar, thank you.
Well, one last question to leave us with, Craig. One, if you had one last piece of advice to leave for everybody, what would that be? And 2, where can people find you?
All right. First of all, let's go with number 2 first. I mean, I can only see a few people, but raise your hand if a year from now you'd like to be at least 3 times better than the speaker you are today. Good. Then for absolutely free, you can go to one of my websites, which is 52speakingtips.com. That's 52speakingtips.com. And every week for a year, you're going to get an audio lesson from me. And by the end of that year, you will be at least 3 times better than the speaker you are today. So that's where they can go right now, 52speakingtips.com. Last piece of advice I would say is this. Know why you're on stage. Know why you're on stage. When I was going through the World Championship and I won at the club level, the area level, the division level, there would always be somebody who came up to me afterwards and say, hey, man, great job. And they'd give me attaboys and pats on the back and trophies and things like that. But somebody would always come up to me afterwards and say, great job, man. Are you going to win the next one? And I always said to them, I don't know. I'm just trying to touch lives. I'm just trying to touch lives. The interesting thing was every time I reached out my hand to touch a life, somebody put a trophy in it. But here's the key. Here's the key. Here's the key. I never reached for the trophy, CJ. I always reached for the life. So I'm not going to leave you with a statement. I'd rather leave you with a question, which is, what are you reaching for?
I'm gonna let my body process the emotion for a bit before I continue.
and Yasser, I want to thank you. I love what you do. I'm following you on all the different social media, and I'm a big fan. Keep doing it because you're changing lives, and you certainly are touching lives.
I appreciate it, my friend. Everyone, let's give Craig a huge round of applause, please. One last thing I want everyone to do right after you log out, please go to Circle in the community chat. Let us know your biggest takeaways from today. I'm going to screenshot that and send it to Craig. Craig, it's been a pleasure as always, my friend. Thank you so much.
It's my pleasure, Yasser. Take care. Thank you so much.
Everybody.
All right.